Hello there, and appreciate your show and everything.
Thank you.
I'm over a year being a new Catholic in, my early 50s after being Protestant for many years, but I have a question. I never missed a single RCIA, and all I can say is I am just humbled at how deep and wide and how ignorant I was at not knowing Catholic history or Orthodox history. So I'm kind of overwhelmed right now, and I just wanted to ask maybe an encouraging question to stay on point. It's not scrupulosity, but it's, I guess, for people that are 1 year into it and just crossing this river of just, oh my gosh, I was, in that ignorance. What encouragement? I'll just take it off the phone. But yeah, I'm just, thought I'd
Yeah, great. I appreciate the question. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So I'm really excited that you're inspired to learn more about Catholic history and Orthodox history and all the depths of the riches of the Church and the treasury of the saints and the Catholic theological heritage. That's beautiful and wonderful. However, none of those things are necessary for salvation. None of those things are essential to the moral life. And so they can become for you kind of a beautiful avocation to spend your time studying deeply in the writings of the fathers and the liturgical and the moral and the historical writings of the Church, and that will greatly enrich your intellectual life and can enrich your moral life too and your social life as well. So it all has great value. But ultimately what we need to be saved is to have the love of God in our hearts. And for that, Christ has appointed, the doctrine of the Church and the sacraments and the community of the faithful, and really there to accompany you. And that sanctification is gradual. It does not take place in an instant. And many times we stumble and we get up again, and we stumble and we get up again. And faith and perseverance are really the key things here, right? Remember the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, and the tax collector says, "Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner." And Christ says he's the one that goes home justified, not the guy who claims to have it all together. So the awareness that, oh my gosh, I'm really behind here, I'm like miles behind, there's so little I know, there's so little progress I've made, that is the perfect disposition for growth in the Christian life. The guy who says, I've got it all figured out, I know all the answers, and I've totally accomplished, he's the one that is going to be surprised on the last day. So I actually think maintaining that attitude of a beginner is exactly where you need to be, that sort of humble docility, to teaching and to grace and a desire to grow and an openness is exactly where you need to be. And, as you move along in the life of faith, spiritual life proceeds in stages. First stage of the spiritual life really is trying to purify ourselves of our immoderate attachments. And that, for a lot of people, that can be the work of a lifetime.
Yeah.
And if it is, so be it. That's the path you're given to tread. There's a second stage of the spiritual life where we really come to have the mind of Christ. Paul talks about that. Says we have the mind of Christ. We call this illumination, when we can see the world through Jesus's eyes, as it were. And that is really a higher spiritual state that comes after we've purified those immoderate attachments, really given ourselves over to the life of faith and the practice of the sacraments and the life of prayer. It's a mystical state, and not everybody gets there, but it is. But it's the goal, It's not I who live, but Christ that lives in me. The saints all get there, and then finally we have this perfect union of the will with God's will, and really the great saints get there before they die, and that's when you can say with St. Paul, "I count all things lost." Compared to the glory and the majesty of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. Most of us are not, in a position if my 401k, goes to heck in a handbasket, or I catch some horrible disease, or I have some tragedy. We're not going to say, no big deal, I'm united to Christ. We still feel those kinds of things very deeply, and maybe, get down on ourselves. But that when we can be like the Blessed Virgin Mary and say, "Lord, be it done to me according to thy word. Whatever you decree for me, whatever your providence sends my way, I'm okay with that because I trust you." That's really quite a very high degree of holiness that the great saints reach. Most of us probably won't get there in this life. So right now, that attitude of the beginner, that humble desire to grow, that willingness to confess one's faults and get up and try again, that's where you need to be.
Thanks so much for your call. You're a convert. I'm a convert. Do you think that the idea of the honeymoon period is a real thing, or maybe even a danger?
Oh, absolutely. And the saints all write about it. The modern Catholic writers will sometimes speak about what they call God candy, where you get kind of a trip out of the discovery of the novelty of the thing. And the Catholic world is I had a professor in graduate school, not a Catholic man, but a great scholar, in a class on American religion. I wasn't a Catholic at the time, and I remember when he introduced his lectures on Catholicism, he sort of took a step back and said, the Catholic Church is a very special world. You know? And I thought, yeah, it is. It really is. There's something, there's a mystique, particularly to the convert. I mean, I remember the first time I ever came to EWTN, I was not a Catholic. I was investigating the Catholic faith, and I went up to the St. Michael Hall, you know, and we have these giant confessionals in there. And to me, a Protestant, they looked like nothing so much as a couple of Iron Maidens, you know, out of some medieval torture chamber, and these, you know, these gilded angels in the chapel, an aesthetic that was so unfamiliar to me. You know, the celibacy of the priests and the religious, something that was strange and novel, and it all had this very sort of esoteric and mystical aspect. And then you begin to dive in and you learn this new vocabulary. And the vocabulary is unique. It's like any society. We have our own verbiage, and there's a lot of it. And Catholics use words in ways that other people don't use them. And all these references to saints and all this activity in the liturgy. I remember the first time I went to the liturgy, I was like, everybody's going to look and stare at me because I don't know when to stand and when to kneel and when to make the sign of the cross, and what are they doing with their thumb when they do that thing? You know, like there's so much just stuff, just stuff, and yeah, there's a kind of, for me, there was a kind of accelerating excitement of discovery, and then when you finally began to sort of put the pieces together in a coherent form, you're like, I've got it, I'm a genius, you know, and that's when you're dangerous. That's when you're dangerous, and then, you know, I was lucky that the Catholic world was terribly unimpressed that I was available to teach for about a good 10 years after my conversion.
Isn't that funny? It's an amazing thing.
I mean, I showed up at a local parish, and I was like, you know, I've got a PhD in theology, and I've been teaching theology all my life. And they were like, great, we'll make you an RCIA sponsor.
Very humbling.
Right,
Very
exactly.
indeed.